Hey there everyone! So I wanted to revisit my feelings from a few weeks ago surrounding gender, since I think that it made me really realize the importance of communicating honestly in trans circles. And the response really reflects just how repressive our communities really are. First off, I don't regret at all what I did. In fact, I'm really glad that I voiced my opinion. Why? Because for those who were willing to listen, they took my rough cut and they tried to clean it up. Through that process, I was able to learn more about not just myself and my own relation to gender, but those other people's understanding of it as well. It's not like my feelings were going to go away by ignoring it for another 10 years. When I said that I had great conversations over it, I really do mean it, and they helped me and my friends grow our understanding of trans issues at large. So, a bit of advice to viewers moving forward. You should ask yourselves why someone is saying something and not automatically jump to conclusions of malice. Why would a transgender man who despises TERFs, who explains to people that their ontology is fundamentally incomprehensible, who explains to you the detailed ways and how they pressure trans men to detransition at all times, how does that person support TERF ideas? It seems to me the reason why so many trans women believe this is because they assume that any discussion surrounding people born with uteruses, vaginas, whatever, must originate from a discussion of trans misogyny. It's almost as if us talking about how we discuss uteruses and vaginas has something to do with the invalidation of a trans woman's identity as a woman because of her own genitalia, which... it's literally not about that. It's about the stuff you don't have right now. That somehow the discussion of our bodies is in of itself a problem. I feel like when the goal is to remove an external body part, it's a lot easier to act like it should not be part of the discussion than when it's an issue of adding something onto your body on the outside. To me, this very problem is the misogyny in of itself that attacks trans men, because we are still subject to the misogyny of living with these organs, and yet we are not allowed to speak out about it because of the activities of transphobic cis women who, if left to their own devices, would detransition us and force us into accepting motherhood. I say this because it was those who realized that I was not acting in malice at all, but describing a very real problem that I experienced regularly, a problem that I was able to demonstrate in a future video as being real and existing, and one that warrants discussion. How many minorities have you dismissed on the grounds of some flat moral justice platitude when they were just trying to inform you of a far more nuanced problem? As it turns out, if we are to take the issues that surround our politics seriously, we should stop treating our existences as something that needs to obey a strict rule of coherence. The very act of being queer is incoherent, so why are we assimilating into a larger cis-heteronormative binary narrative of why we should exist the way we do in the first place? Notably, the people who came forward to criticize me consistently dismissed the importance and seriousness of intersex rights. Not because they wanted to, but because they were incapable of understanding that trans theory emerges as a way to explain us, not as a dogma to organize us. A major part of my motivation for exploring my gender in a way that opens up a feminine side to the transmasculine identity actually originated in my earliest days of reading Deleuze and Guattari in 2020. In A Thousand Plateaus, Deleuze exclaims that there's no such thing as becoming man. This obviously sounds problematic at first glance, because the way that trans men are coded is that we are becoming men. However, this whole becoming men thing didn't really sit right with me, even if I didn't recognize that at the time, and becoming woman presented me a new way to think about the problem. It is a little funny to me how many trans people who supposedly love Deleuze, who furiously told me to go fuck myself in the past month, are completely ignorant of this asymmetry in their work, which may reflect their position of privilege in the trans spectrum. or maybe just the fact that they don't actually read the books, but oh well. This observation aside, how does a trans man find himself able to metabolize becoming woman anyway? And this is when I recognize that the asymmetry produced by the Oedipus complex and how it binds to people based on their assigned gender at birth also produces an asymmetry in how trans people experience their trans experience, which is illuminated so clearly to me with why the narratives that trans women use to describe their experience and basically take for granted did not feel like they fit mine at all. While trans women were becoming women in a very literal sense, the relationship that trans men have with becoming women is less clear. Instead of literally becoming women, their becoming woman is more associated with feminist impulses, becoming a woman as opposed to a wife, and extending it so far that it includes the occupation of the territory of becoming a man in of itself. In fact, this is why a lot of trans men have so many intersections both historically and in the modern era with dyke culture. Trans men are trying to becoming women by pushing the boundaries of what it even means to be a woman, but in a completely different way than trans women do. This asymmetry doesn't dismantle the real identity of trans people, but rather reinforces it with a new angle to analyze the clockwork of gender through. On that subject, I'd like to point out that there's no such thing as a TERF dog whistle. I'm really sick of hearing this phrase. To clarify, a dog whistle is a sign that is deliberately trying to obscure the content and originator of the sign to the general public, so that secret communicators between fringe communities can occur in the open, or signaling threats to minorities. For example, when you go to Walmart and see 1488 everywhere, that's a Nazi dog whistle, because saying the 14 words and saying that you support the SS in public is not acceptable behavior. Contrast this with how TERFs function. They're constantly bitching about this or that and aren't hiding anything. Rather, they are simply incoherent. They really believe that they should detransition trans men, people whom they see as women, while apparently also believing that they should not tell women what to do with their lives. It is a position that is contradictory, but a contradiction never killed anyone. Instead, they are able to be open because nobody is actually listening to them seriously outside of the fact that they were a really useful ally for transphobes. Oh, I'm the poor woman and they're going around and they're hurting me. Here's my bullshit theory to explain why their feminism is wrong. Do you really think any of those people are reading their fucking feminist papers? No! Come on, get real. Once they reach their objectives, they, along with every other transphobic group, will start eating each other alive. People seem really uneasy to talk about these insecurities and problems within the trans community. Presenting new ideas on how to metabolize gender is more often than not met with aggressive skepticism and fear, rather than a new possibility of exploration. Whether it be now with these more open-ended ideas with non-binary people, or how we saw people treating non-binary people in the past, and other sort of horizons, it's the same fucking shit, right? Considering that the entire purpose of transition, whether it be social or medical, is to take control of our bodies and to take charge of our destinies in a gendered world, don't you think that forcing us back down onto our own understanding of things into a comfortable little world of our own ontologies defeats the purpose of gender liberation? People will claim gender liberation this, gender abolition that, and yet they are too afraid to let go of the ontologies that bind them the moment that a transgender minority expresses discomfort with dominating narratives surrounding their own experience with gender. I should not be afraid to tell the trans community that I am a woman who became a man who is becoming a woman, without being labeled as a detransitioner, a threat to women, etc. All of this behavior is not a consequence of queer ideas, but rather the trauma of queer assimilationism. It is the impression of cis-heteronormativity on our own experience. Let us not forget that about 40 years ago, us faggots were put into positions threatening our direct existence. The new and vulnerable sexual liberation front was faced with many issues following the initial release of its flows of desire in the 1960s. It had to make sense of itself in its own way, and anything that could be would be targeted for purposes of extermination, whether it be the active ignoring of AIDS by the US government for years, the constant police surveillance and harassment, and the asymmetrical laws about sexual consent that clearly targeted queers. This oppressive establishment acted as a constant attempt to smother this movement. Perhaps the largest vulnerability was that of underage sex. The rape culture of cis-heteronormativity actually regularly codes for pedophilic images throughout media. This is the reason why when you're in a Discord server and someone starts talking about the legality of lolicon, it becomes a massive debate with people seriously and openly defending the legality of lolicon. But if you were to discuss a hardcore but legal, weird sexual fetish, people would have a way bigger problem with that, right? The only thing that holds back this culture from mass open pedophilia is a reinforcement of Christian guilt norms that exist more to protect the family than to protect victims. In fact, these very words to describe the relationship of pedophiles, victims, predators, etc., exist to create a consumable semiotic that reinforces the production of pedophiles. After all, the pedophile hunters need pedophiles to continue to deliver the libidinal product that so many straights consume to justify the massive growing child exploitation collection that the government agencies legally own. With this in mind, it's important to consider that in its early years, this gay liberation movement had unfortunate relations with pedophiles because it had not yet established its own ontologies for understanding why they exist and how to deal with it. Early on, pedophile organizations found themselves allied with homosexual organizations on this principles of no rules to desire, with disastrous political effect. As such, leaders in the homosexual movements and adjacent leftist political struggles were commonly labeled as pedophiles to try to delegitimize their movement. To defend themselves from such attacks, the queer movement as a whole adopted cis-heteronormative codes for handling these issues to prevent complete political implosion. Queer assimilationism found its route through the constant pressure of being labeled as pedophiles, even if this represented a very tiny amount of the movement, simply because they had not fully constructed an ontology to exclude them. Even today, the problem of pedophilia in Western society continues to grow worse and worse as a result of these cisgender narratives surrounding youth and fertility, all while both victims can't speak free from their label as a society as a victim, predators are not punished for their behavior and allowed to run rampant, and even are protected legally in many cases, and the youth can't have honest discussions or questions about their own relationship to sexuality or their own experiences without having a constant social eye of surveillance pointed in their faces. So keep all of this in mind when you insist that gender must work in a certain way, or that one must uphold binary spaces within transgender communities to preserve the sanctity of what it means to be a man or a woman. Because it is actually this kind of thinking, much more than anything I produced last month, that actually ensures the success of the transphobic movement. Problems like these and the question of how to make sense of pedophiles in a sexually liberated world are hard questions that we have to solve by continually breaking down and recreating our own ontologies to make sense of our continuously and trailblazing relation to sexuality and gender.